The Taoiseach Mr Lynch said tonight that it was hard to believe that any group, no matter how base, could shoot down a man in cold blood in such a manner. He said the crime was all the more reprehensible that it was done at the end of a marriage ceremony. He wished the victims a speedy recovery and extended his sympathy to the young bride and both families.
We were going to get married in Southern Ireland, in a little town called Trim, which is about 30 miles outside of Dublin. And anyway, I asked for permission through the adjutant, and he was told, because it wasn't just me, of course, there were other officers at the wedding as guests, Fusiliers, Anglicans and Queensmen, and we were told, yeah, it's fine, you can go. And then so we went, and we were there for a few days before the wedding, because I had to get things like a wedding ring and one or two other things, because of course we were living apart in different countries. And we come the big day, and my best man and I and a couple of others went in a car to the church, and we, like best men do, stood in the church. It was a Roman Catholic church, so I knew I was on to not really knowing what I was supposed to do, but anyway. And we waited, and eventually, Jaqueline, Jacqui, my lovely bride, arrived, and we had the ceremony. And at the end of the ceremony, we went to the door to greet all our guests, and they introduced themselves as so and so, and I'd immediately forget who they were, because I thought we'd have plenty of time at the reception to catch up. And then we had photographs taken, not many actually, but we had a few photographs taken on the church steps. And then by mutual consent it was time to go to the car and go to the reception, or so I thought. And as we were walking towards the car, and this is no great distance, I'm talking 20 paces probably from the steps of the church to the gate, there were a couple of a couple of bangs, and we looked at each other, and I don't know what we thought. I think we thought someone, it was fireworks or something. I don't know. Is that what they do? I didn't know. And then having looked at her, I then looked back, and I could see two gunmen stood by the gate, or in fact inside technically the church grounds. And one had, I could see one had what looked like a very big revolver, which subsequently turned out to be a Webley service revolver. Talk about being shot with your own weapons, but anyway. And anyway, the first, I think I knew they weren't going to miss. I mean, we were almost me to you. That's the sort of, maybe a little bit further. And anyway, what turned out to be the first, I thought a bullet missed us. I don't know, but anyway, it seemed as though one went between us and missed us. And then the second, what I thought was the second bullet from the revolver, caught me in the lower chest. And then, but that went in and out. And the next bullet caught me in the shoulder, left shoulder. And that obviously turned me. And as it turned me, I remember just pushing Jacqui and seeing her go and get down behind a tree, which is no longer there, interestingly, but anyway. And then I felt something hit me in the hip, which I thought was another bullet, but it turned out to be a barrel of son or shotgun. Anyway, just in front of me was this big stone pillar here at the gate, and I thought if I can maybe I can get down behind that. Although Ian Lyles will tell you my reaction to effective enemy fire was useless.
Gary and Jacqui walked out of the doors. We were all outside throwing confetti. Got to the cemetery gates, and from behind a car that was parked on the road came two gunmen, with a third gunman down by their getaway car, and he had a Armalite or an AK-47, can't remember which. They shot Gary, a handgun and a shotgun, stood over him, fired the shotgun into his back, and then the bloke with the it was an AK-47, I think, fired a magazine off, one burst across the top of everybody. There was another guest hit, but the thing I'd like to point out now was that Cass's fieldcraft was absolutely appalling. His reaction to coming under enemy effective fire was to lie on the ground moaning. There was no dash down, crawl of sights observed.
But anyway, I managed to get down behind this pillar, and they, I don't know where they were, but they were going back. A car had pulled up, and 3 guys had got out of the car. I didn't know that, obviously, at the time, but subsequently I found this out. And they, anyway, as they were going to get back into the car, the back, sort of midriff down my legs, was still sticking out into the main, luckily on the red carpet, into the main sort of area of the aisle, from the church, the pathway. And so he leant over, I'm not sure which one it was, but he leant over and put the final barrel into my right kidney, which the surgeon said was 3 feet. If my head had been stuck out, he'd have put it into my head, and you and I wouldn't be talking. So that was an interesting wedding day. I always describe it as the best and worst day of my life.
Mr. Cass, a member of the British Army, had just married a local girl, Miss Jaqueline Johnson. They left the church and were posing for photographs when 3 men pulled up in a car. One of the eyewitnesses to what happened next was a local disc jockey, Neil Lacey. What happened?
Well, I was just arrived here on my bike, and I was just watching the wedding when a car stopped and 3 men jumped from the car, and one of them fired a light machine gun, some shots from a light machine gun into the air, which dispersed the crowd, and 2 more of them walked over into the lawn of the church and fired some shots at the groom and bride, and then they ran off, and that was it as far as I was concerned.
Lieutenant Cass was rushed to hospital seriously wounded, but is now thought to be out of danger.
Because I was probably the closest to him, I got to him first, but we also had a state registered nurse as one of the guests, and she started to administer first aid. We all got covered in blood, Cass's blood, and I thought he was going to die. He was bleeding really, really badly, especially from the hole in his back. But she, me, a couple of others put compression by putting our fists on the wounds with the handkerchiefs and whatever else we could find. And off he went, and I remember his dad came up to me on his buck. His dad was cracking Isle of Wight, honest, and he said, he's going to die in, isn't he? I said, I've had worse cuts shaving, Mr. Cass. He's not going to die.
I could see Jacqui moving, so I knew she was okay. And one of our guests was a doctor and an anaesthetist. And as I say, eventually, I don't know how long. I think I missed the golden hour, put it that way, but it was they piled me into the back of an ambulance and took me to Navan Hospital, which I suppose is the nearest hospital. And on the way there, Richard, who was the doctor, we became great friends later on, he was asking me for my blood group. And I looked at him thinking, why? Anyway, and I couldn't remember. And he said, well, you're a soldier, you must remember your blood group. But I did remember that in those days it was typed on the back of your ID card. So I said, if my wallet's in my pocket, if you get my wallet out, you'll find an ID card in there, and it's on the back of there, you'll be able to see it. So he was able to radio ahead anyway and say, my blood group. But there was nothing in the ambulance, apart from me on the stretcher. There was no, they may have had oxygen, I don't know, but there were no fluids. A bit like an army ambulance in the 70s where you had first field dressings and aspirin. But I got to the hospital, they cut my clothing off, and I had a cardiac arrest. but obviously they managed, to bring me back to life. Just as well I had it in the hospital, not in the ambulance or on the road. But,
when he got to the hospital, the surgeon went, "Whoa, what am I going to do with this?" And John McGiven, who was a top gunshot wound professor from Northern Ireland, had been down lecturing about gunshot wounds and how to deal with them. And he just left, and they got him back, and he did all the operations on Gary, on his liver in particular. Otherwise, I think he would have died. Well, he did die several times, or twice, I think.
So against the odds, I survived that, and then I remember being in this room waiting to go to surgery, and they were asking me. Well, actually, they weren't asking me a lot. I remember the surgeon was taking photographs because I was just laid, naked on a bed, on a sheet, and this nurse came in and said, "Mrs. Cass is here to see you," and I turned expecting my mother, and obviously it was Jacqui. And a guest had sort of taken off her dress and given it to her so that she wouldn't turn up in a white dress. And I think all I could manage to say to her was, "You've changed." And I'll be honest, by then all I wanted them to do was put me out. It started really hurt. I just wanted to put me under, because I knew once they put me under, it wouldn't matter. Well, I mean, obviously it would matter, but I mean, I'd be out of pay. And if I came to, if I survived, I survived. If I didn't, I didn't. But obviously I did. And then I woke up, God knows, early hours in the morning. They cleared an entire ward, and my bed had screens on both sides, and all the windows were blacked out. And I came to, and the first thing I saw was the muzzle of a submachine gun. And I think the Special Branch Protection Team obviously saw. And they said, "Look, don't worry, etc., etc., etc." And then that was the start of a long, period. Yeah, people were always asking, "How are you? How are you feeling?" etc., etc., etc. And I don't recall very many, if any, people saying to her, "How are you feeling?" And basically, I turned her whole life upside down by marrying her, and what happened? She became a stranger in her own country. Things are better now, but I mean, I ripped her away from everything she ever knew.
So the thing I remember most was the helplessness of it. If we'd have been armed, we could have taken all three of them out. Not being able to do anything, and I think the guilt of that stayed with me for quite a while, and still does occasionally. What could I have done? Well, the answer was nothing. I'd have just got killed myself.
After a couple of weeks back in the battalion, I got a visit from the police at Bassingbourn to say, they've arrested these guys and it's going to trial. And so we're making arrangements for you to go to Dublin for trial. Yeah, I was called to give out. I mean, we were all called at different times. We lived in a room a bit like this, only smaller, in the courtroom, in the courthouse, Special Criminal Court. And I was called a few times into the courtroom because, of course, people had to identify me as the person who had been shot. So I was there when the surgeon was telling them what he'd done to me on the operating table, which is I wouldn't recommend for anybody. I had to give evidence myself, which was interesting, and it was during that evidence I could see the two guys, because they only caught two of them. A guy called O'Hare, Desi O'Hare, who was I'm not sure he was well known at the time, but he became very well. He became the most wanted man in Ireland at one stage. And Peter McAwella. And I was asked, could I recognise them? And I looked. And they weren't wearing masks when they did it. But I had to be honest and say, well, actually I couldn't. And I remember years later when I was seeing some guy about problems I was having with traumas and whatever, And I told him about this particular time as well, and he said, do you wish you'd said yes? And I remember at the time thinking, there were times when I wish I had said yes. But anyway, cut a long story short, they got away with it, and they were acquitted. And the police never looked for anybody else. At the time, I think I personally thought, well, maybe in some ways that's not a bad thing. Her family are still living there, etc., etc., etc. Maybe that's the best answer. And the guard, he said to me, look, one day we'll get him. One day we'll get him.